Hey there, I'm Simon Spaulding and welcome to Simon's Cinema. So, as I promised in my review of the original Blade Runner, I went and saw Blade Runner 2049, so let's review. Blade Runner 2049 is directed by Denis Villeneuve, who has made 4 movies that I really enjoyed: Enemy, Prisoners, Sicario, and Arrival, so I was very excited when I found out he was the one who was going to direct the new Blade Runner. The story is set in the year 2049, obviously, and follows Agent K, played by Ryan Gosling, a new Blade Runner who, upon learning a new development about replicants, is sent on a case to find the origin of this new development. His search eventually leads him to Harrison Ford's character Deckard from the original Blade Runner, who has been in hiding for 30 years now. And I should probably stop giving specifics about the plot right there. I think if you haven't seen this movie yet, you should go into it knowing as little as possible about the plot, like I did, and trust me, it is worth it. I'm gonna come right out and say it. This movie is better than the original. It is a science fiction masterpiece. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate the original Blade Runner and what it did to change science fiction as a whole, but looking back on it, I did have some problems with it, as I pointed out in my review, but this movie added to the universe that movie created, and then some. Honestly, the plot is not the first thing you're going to be talking about when you leave the theater, because from a technical perspective, this movie is nearly flawless. I was enthralled by every technical aspect of this movie. For one, the cinematography is unbelievable. This is possibly one of the best looking movies I've ever seen. There is not a single shot of this movie that you couldn't probably print off and put on your wall as a poster. It's that amazing. I mentioned in my review of the original that I loved the sets, and I think I love the sets in this movie even more. Every single set in the movie is overflowing with atmosphere to the point that I felt like every single one was just jumping right off the screen. The reason I think I liked these sets more is because, unlike the original, you don't spend the entire movie just in the city of LA. You travel to a gigantic scrapyard that used to be San Diego, and you travel to a nuclear bomb wasted Las Vegas, and it looks unbelievable. Another thing I really appreciated about these sets is that I never once felt like I was looking at something that wasn't actually there. Everything in this movie looks like it's actually happening, and it is all encompassing. The music as well in this movie is fantastic. During the really intense scenes, the music sounds more like the groan of a gigantic machine, and it feels like you can just sense this gigantic universe breathing in and out. And it's just, I cannot praise this movie's technical accomplishments enough. And outside of the technical perspective, there was plenty to like about this movie as well. Before I get into the other things that I liked, I'm gonna point out the one real problem I had with this movie. That one problem would be Jared Leto's character in this movie is essentially a replacement for Tyrell from the original. However, he basically thinks of himself as God in this movie. He even calls the replicants that he creates angels. And while the rest of the actors in this movie give very subtle, layered performances, whenever Leto was on screen, he felt pretty jarring because he's basically a cartoon character. However, 2 aspects surrounding his performance really made me not care as much as I normally would. with something that sticks out that much. For one, whenever his character is on screen, he's surrounded by some of the best sets in the movie that I just could not take my eyes off of. And secondly, thank God he's only in the movie for about 10 minutes. The trailers for this movie led you to believe that he was going to be a very big part of the movie, but he's not. I guess it's the Jared Leto effect because they cut more than half of his screen time in Suicide Squad, and maybe they shot more of his character in this movie and that just ended up on the cutting room floor too. But honestly, I'm glad they did, if they did decide to cut him, because he was easily the most subpar part of this movie. Thankfully, as well, we get a much better villain out of the replicant named Love, played by Silvia Hoax, and she is probably one of the best female villains I've ever seen in a movie. Certainly the best that I've seen in a long time. The performances across the board are stellar. Ryan Gosling brings his absolute A game and carries this movie. Harrison Ford as well, who I was pretty concerned about going into this, that they would rely on his presence too much just to press that nostalgia button, but thankfully they use him sparingly. In fact, he's not really even in the first half of this movie. Really, the reason I enjoyed this movie so much is because it could have very easily have just been an attempt to start a new franchise out of a classic. Just look at what they tried to do with Terminator Genesis, and that stunk horribly. But that is not at all what they tried to do with this movie. This is a Blade Runner sequel, the way a Blade Runner sequel should be made. Another thing I'd like to point out is that this movie did not do very well at the box office its first weekend. It earned just over $37 million in the US, and its budget exceeded $150 million. Now, the only thing I have to say about that is go and see this movie. It's worth it. If you haven't seen the original Blade Runner, rent that on DVD, and then go see this on the biggest screen possible. See it in IMAX if you can, because it deserves to be seen on that kind of scale. And especially if you're someone like me who appreciates the filmmaking process and loves to see when genuine craftsmanship is put into every aspect of a movie, you have to go support this. Go see this ASAP. It is one of the best movies of the year and one of the best science fiction movies ever made. In the end, with everything considered, I'm going to give Blade Runner 2049 a 9.7 out of 10. If it hadn't been for that one little hiccup, this possibly could have been one of my favorite movies of all time. Thanks everyone for clicking on this video. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel to see more videos like it, and tell me your thoughts in the comments if you've seen Blade Runner or Blade Runner 2049. Thanks everyone and have a great day.